I was only 17, just a young girl when life had already placed heavy chains on my shoulders. While others my age dreamed of school, friends, and freedom, I was a maid in a mansion that was never mine. Its walls were tall, its rooms filled with gold and beauty, but none of it belonged to me. I could polish the marble floors, clean the shining glass windows, and dust the grand chandeliers, yet I had no right to enjoy any of it. I lived in the shadows of that house, silent and unseen, like a piece of furniture that served others but was never truly noticed. Every morning, I forced a smile onto my face as I bowed my head and greeted the family I worked for. But those smiles were not born of joy, they were bought with hunger and pain. I smiled because I had no choice. I smiled because the little money I earned kept a roof over my head and a little food in my stomach. Behind every smile was the ache of an empty belly, the sting of rough work on my young hands, and the silent tears I wiped away when no one was looking. 17 is supposed to be the age of dreams, but mine were stolen long before they could bloom. I never wore fine clothes. My hands were always cracked from scrubbing floors. I never ate meals at the grand dining table. I ate scraps in the kitchen when no one was watching. While the daughters of the mansion laughed in silks and jewels, I worked in silence, wearing the same worn-out dress, with calluses on my feet and a heart too heavy for my age. The mansion was full of music and light for its owners, but for me, it was a prison of endless duties. I was not treated with kindness, only with commands. Do this. Clean that. Serve here. And I obeyed because I had to survive. My body was tired, my spirit even more. Every smile I gave was a mask to hide the hunger that gnawed at me and the pain that lived deep inside. Sometimes at night, I would sit by the servants' quarters window and look up at the stars. I would wonder if life had something better for me, if the world outside those walls could ever hold freedom, love, and happiness. But morning always came, and with it, the endless chores, the endless smiles, the endless pain. At 17, I was not living a life, I was surviving it. And though the mansion was grand and beautiful, to me it was nothing more than a place where my youth was stolen, where every smile I gave was bought not with joy but with hunger and pain. They accused me of stealing something I had never even touched, a gold necklace that had mysteriously vanished from the mistress's room. I still remember the moment clearly, as if it were carved into my soul. The mistress stormed into the servants' quarters, her face red with anger, her voice sharp like a knife. In her hands was an empty jewelry box, and in her eyes was fury. Before I could even breathe a word, her finger pointed at me. "It was you," she said, her voice trembling with rage. The other servants looked at me in shock, some in silence, some with suspicion, as if my guilt was already written on my face. But I was innocent. I had never even touched that necklace. I had only seen it once, shining brightly against her throat as she laughed at a grand party. My heart pounded as I tried to explain, but no one listened. "I didn't do it," I cried, my voice breaking with fear, but the words fell to the ground like dust. To them, I was the easiest target. I was young, poor, powerless, and voiceless. In their eyes, a maid's denial was worth nothing compared to the word of a wealthy mistress. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in on me as the accusations grew louder. Servants whispered, guards glared, and the mistress shouted. My world, already fragile, shattered with every word they threw at me. Inside, I burned with a mix of shame and despair. Why was I the one blamed for something I hadn't done? The truth was simple. I was the weakest link, the one no one would defend. My hunger, my poverty, and my silence made me an easy scapegoat. A poor maid accused of theft was a story that everyone could believe, even if it wasn't true. That night I sat alone, trembling. The weight of the false accusation pressed on my chest like a heavy stone. I had nothing in this world, not even enough food to fill my stomach, yet they believed I had stolen a necklace of gold. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I thought about how unfair life had been. I had worked with honesty, endured their harsh words, their endless orders, their cruelty, yet still I was treated as a thief. The pain was not just in the accusation, but in the loss of dignity. They stripped me of the only thing I had left, my honor. No matter how much I protested, my words were drowned by their power. To them, truth did not matter. Only wealth and status decided who was guilty and who was innocent. That night, I realized something even more painful. In the mansion, I had never been a person in their eyes. I was just a servant, a tool, someone to blame when things went wrong. And now, because of a necklace I had never even touched, I carried the brand of a thief on my soul. At first, I thought it was only a misunderstanding, something small that would clear up once the truth was spoken. I believed that if I explained myself, if I cried out with honesty in my voice, they would see my innocence. I had faith that truth was a shield, that honesty was enough to protect me. I thought the mistress, in her anger, would eventually realize she was wrong, and the family would forgive me for something I never did. I told myself, stay calm. The truth will save you. But soon, I learned the bitter reality. Truth had no place in that house. In that mansion, truth was not measured by facts, but by power. The mistress's word was law, and my voice was nothing more than noise to them. Every time I tried to defend myself, my words were dismissed as lies. My tears were called tricks, my pleas were called excuses. The more I spoke, the more they hardened against me. It was as if my innocence was invisible, erased by the shadows of wealth and status that towered over me. I watched in silence as the necklace's disappearance became a story told over and over again in the halls of the mansion. Servants whispered, guards smirked, and the family looked at me with cold eyes. No one asked me what had really happened, no one searched for the truth. Why would they? They already had their answer. To them, I was guilty simply because I was poor. My word could never weigh as much as the word of a rich mistress. The pain of this realization cut deeper than the accusation itself. It meant that no matter how honest I was, no matter how much I begged, I would never be heard. I was not seen as a human being in that house. I was only a servant, a body meant to work, a mouth meant to stay silent. My truth was worth nothing because it came from someone like me, someone who had no wealth, no power, no voice. At night, I cried in my small room, clutching the thin blanket as if it could protect me from the cruelty of the world. I replayed the events again and again in my mind, wondering how things had gone so wrong. I had believed in honesty, but in that house, lies wore crowns and truth was thrown into the dirt. I realized then that I was not fighting against a false accusation, but against an entire system that was built on cruelty and silence. And so, the hope I had at first slowly faded. My belief that truth could save me turned into despair. In that mansion, truth was not a key, it was a curse. It had no place, no power, no light. My innocence lived only in my heart, unseen and unheard, buried beneath the weight of their accusations. They locked me in a dark room, shutting the heavy door with a sound that echoed in my bones. The moment the key turned, I felt my heart sink. There were no windows, no light, no comfort, only walls that seemed to close in tighter with every breath I took. The air was cold and heavy, carrying the smell of dust and dampness, and it felt as though even the silence had weight, pressing down against my chest until it was hard to breathe. I sat on the hard floor, my knees pulled to my chest, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Fear became my only companion. It crawled into my mind and whispered thoughts I didn't want to hear. What if they never open the door again? What if I disappear here, forgotten? My hands trembled as I touched the walls, hoping to find some crack, some way out, but there was nothing. Just endless darkness. Time lost all meaning inside that room. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes felt like hours. Every sound made me jump. The creak of wood, the scurrying of rats, or the distant footsteps outside. I felt like a prisoner, though my only crime was being poor and powerless. In that silence, memories of my short life filled my mind. I thought of the days I worked endlessly in the mansion, cleaning, scrubbing, serving, hoping that my honesty would one day be enough to earn respect. I thought of my childhood, when I still had dreams, when I believed the world could be kind. And now, at only 17, here I was, locked in a room, branded as a thief, drowning in fear. The darkness was not just around me, it was inside me. It whispered that my life had no value, that I was nothing more than a servant who could be punished without reason. I cried, but my tears brought no comfort. They only reminded me of how alone I was. No one believed me, no one cared, no one was coming to save me. The mansion outside continued with its life, laughter in the halls, footsteps on the stairs, while I sat forgotten, swallowed by the dark. At times, I pressed my ear to the door, hoping to hear kindness, hoping someone would whisper, "We believe you." But there was nothing. Just silence. A silence so loud it screamed in my head. My chest grew tighter each moment, as if fear itself had wrapped its hands around me, squeezing until I could barely breathe. That night, as I sat on the cold floor, I realized something that froze my soul. They didn't lock me in that room to wait for truth. They locked me there to break me, to silence me forever. And as the darkness surrounded me, I knew I was no longer just a maid. I was a prisoner of cruelty, trapped in a house where innocence meant nothing and fear ruled every corner. The door creaked open, and the dim light from the hallway spilled into the darkness. My heart leapt for a moment, hoping someone had come to release me, to tell me the nightmare was over. But instead, the figure of the master appeared, tall and cold, his face shadowed with anger. Behind him came several men, each one gripping a stick in his hand. The sticks were thick, long, and heavy, and as I looked at them, I felt my body tremble. They seemed heavier than my fragile frame could ever endure. My hands shook, and my breath caught in my throat as fear spread through me like fire. The master's eyes were sharp, filled not with justice but with cruelty. His steps echoed on the stone floor, each one sounding like a warning of what was to come. The men fanned out behind him, their expressions hard, their grips tight around the sticks as though they had done this many times before. In that moment, I understood. I was not about to be questioned, I was about to be punished. It didn't matter that I was innocent. It didn't matter that I had never touched the gold necklace. To them, my denial was an insult, and my silence was a crime. I pressed myself back against the wall, trying to make myself small, invisible, hoping that somehow they would stop. My voice cracked as I whispered, "I didn't do it. Please, I didn't do it." But my words seemed powerless, swallowed by the heavy air of the room. The master's lips curled into a cold smile that chilled me to the bone. He didn't believe me. He never wanted to. He only wanted to break me, to make me an example for others. The sticks looked enormous in their hands, like weapons designed not just to hurt, but to destroy. My body, thin and tired from endless work, felt weaker than ever. I could already imagine the pain, the bruises, the helplessness. My knees buckled, and tears blurred my vision, but I knew crying would not save me. Crying only pleased them, showed them that their power was working. Fear pressed harder against my chest, crushing me from the inside. In that instant, I realized how powerless I truly was. In that house, truth meant nothing, innocence meant nothing, and my life itself meant nothing. I was just a servant, A young girl whose body could be beaten without question, whose cries could be ignored, whose pain could be dismissed as unimportant. The men lifted the sticks higher, and the shadows on the wall stretched long and dark. My heart raced so fast I thought it might stop before the first strike even fell. As the master stood watching, his eyes cold and unfeeling, I knew the truth. This was not about justice, not about a necklace. This was about control, about power, about breaking me until I no longer had the strength to stand, speak, or fight back. And in that terrifying moment, I realized my body might not survive what was about to happen. Their voices crashed against me like thunder in a storm. "Confess," they shouted again and again, their anger shaking the walls around me. "Tell us where it is. Tell us where you hid the necklace." The sound of their rage filled the dark room, leaving no space for silence, no chance for peace. Their faces were twisted with fury, their eyes burning with suspicion, as though my very breath was proof of guilt. But I had nothing to confess. My lips trembled, my body shook, and my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it echo inside my chest. I wanted to scream back, "I didn't do it. I am innocent. I have nothing to give you." Yet the words felt weak, powerless, and meaningless against their wrath. They were not searching for truth. They were searching for someone to blame. And that someone was me. The shouts grew louder, circling me from every direction. It felt as though the air itself was pressing down, heavy and suffocating, choking the breath from my lungs. They demanded answers I did not have, evidence I could not provide. Their eyes stared into me, searching for cracks, searching for weakness, waiting for me to break. But what was I to confess? What could I possibly say when I had never touched the necklace, never even stepped foot into the mistress's room where it was said to have disappeared? Fear and confusion twisted inside me. My mind raced in circles, desperately trying to understand why fate had chosen me for this torment. I was only a maid, a poor servant girl who had nothing but her hands to work and her heart to hope. Yet here I stood, accused of stealing gold I had never seen, forced to face voices that demanded a lie. "Confess," they shouted again, their sticks slamming against the floor, echoing like drums of war. The sound made me flinch, my body shrinking into itself. My tears fell, but even those were treated as guilt. Every sob, every shake, every desperate plea seemed to convince them more that I was hiding something. But I wasn't. I had nothing to hide, nothing to give. My truth was empty, and my innocence meant nothing in their eyes. The room felt smaller and darker with each passing second. Their voices merged into one terrifying roar, a wall of noise that left me trembling. My thoughts whispered inside me, weak and fragile. What do I say? How do I survive this? How can I prove a truth no one wants to believe? I was trapped in a cage of accusations with no key, no escape, and no hope. And so I stood there, my voice cracking as I whispered again, "I didn't do it." But my words were drowned in the storm of their demands. They didn't want my truth, they wanted my surrender. The silence of my denial was broken by the sudden crack of wood against flesh. The first strike landed on my back with a force so sharp it stole the air from my lungs. Pain exploded through me, a burning fire that tore across my skin and sank deep into my bones. My body jolted forward as though struck by lightning, and before I could stop myself, a scream burst out of my mouth. It was not the scream of a guilty soul, not the cry of someone caught in a lie, but the raw, helpless scream of a child facing suffering too great to bear. The sound of my own voice echoed in my ears, yet it felt far away, as if it belonged to someone else. For a moment, time slowed, and all I could feel was the scorching sting running down my back, leaving behind a trail of agony that seemed to burn hotter with every breath I took. My tears blurred my vision, dripping freely down my cheeks, but no amount of crying could cool the fires spreading across my fragile body. They looked at me with eyes that showed no mercy. My scream, instead of awakening pity, seemed only to encourage them. To them, it was proof that their punishment was working, that they were strong and I was weak, that their power was absolute. The master stood watching, his face cold, his heart unmoved, as if my suffering was nothing more than a necessary act of discipline. I was not a person to them. I was a servant, a scapegoat, a body they could break without question. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my breaths short and shaky, but before I could gather myself, the stick rose again. My mind cried out louder than my voice, "Stop. Please stop." I didn't do it, but the words never left my lips. I knew they would mean nothing. My innocence was invisible to them, drowned by their certainty of my guilt. The memory of that first strike carved itself into me like a wound that would never heal. It wasn't just the pain. It was the shame, the helplessness, the cruel knowledge that no one would save me. I was young, too young to understand why life had chosen this path for me, too young to carry such punishment on my small shoulders. Yet here I was, forced to endure pain that no child should ever know, no innocent soul should ever feel. In that moment, I understood something I had never known before. Truth alone was powerless in the face of cruelty. My scream was not a confession, it was a cry for mercy. But mercy never came. Only the fire of the blows, one after another, each one threatening to break not just my body, but my spirit. The stick came down again and then again. Each blow tore through me like fire, leaving behind trails of pain that burned deeper than the last. The sound of wood striking flesh echoed in the room, sharp and merciless, drowning out my sobs. My knees buckled, my arms shook, and my whole body trembled as though it no longer belonged to me. My strength was fading with every strike, but even as my body grew weaker, my heart clung desperately to one truth: I was innocent. Tears streamed from my eyes, falling freely onto the cold floor below me. The ground grew wet with them, each drop a silent testimony of my suffering, each tear a reminder that I had nothing left to fight with except my words. My cries mixed with my sobs, but through the choking pain, I forced myself to speak. Again and again, with a voice broken but unyielding, I repeated, "I did not steal. I did not steal." The men around me did not care. To them, my tears meant nothing. My words meant nothing. Their arms rose and fell as if they were machines built for punishment, their faces hardened with cruelty, their hearts deaf to my pleas. Every time I cried out my innocence, they struck harder, as if my refusal to confess was a crime greater than any theft. They wanted my surrender, not my truth. But surrender would mean admitting to a lie that would stain my soul forever. The pain was unbearable, yet I clung to my words as if they were my only shield. My body trembled uncontrollably, every muscle screaming in agony, but my voice refused to give them the false confession they demanded. Each time I said, "I did not steal," it came out weaker, softer, but it was still there. My truth, fragile as it was, refused to die. In those moments, I realized the battle was no longer about the necklace, or even about the punishment. It was about my spirit. They could break my body, but if I gave them the lie they wanted, they would break my soul. I was only a child, yet I knew that to confess to a crime I did not commit would mean losing the last piece of myself I still owned: my honesty, my dignity. The blows continued, and the room spun around me in waves of pain and tears. I wanted to collapse and never rise again, to let the darkness swallow me whole, but each time the stick fell, I pushed the words out of my mouth. I did not steal. It was my only weapon, my only defiance, my only truth. And so I endured, soaked in tears, wrapped in agony, yet holding on to the only thing they could not take from me: my innocence. No matter how many times I cried, no matter how many times I said the words, "I did not steal," they refused to believe me. My voice meant nothing to them. My tears were invisible, my pain unimportant. To them, I was not a person with a heart, with dreams, with innocence. I was just a maid, a servant girl whose life held no value. My truth did not matter because in their eyes, the poor could never be trusted. They looked at me as if I was lower than the dust on the floor I scrubbed every day. To them, I was dirt, cheap, replaceable, and undeserving of dignity. They believed that people like me were born only to serve, to be used, to be beaten when convenient. I was nothing more than a shadow in their grand house, someone who could be broken without consequence. My innocence could be crushed beneath their shoes, and the world outside would never know, never care. Every glance they threw at me carried the same message: "You are beneath us." Their words and their actions told me I was worthless. To them, my life began and ended with their commands. If they said I was guilty, then I was guilty. If they demanded my confession, then I was expected to give it, even if it was a lie. In their world, truth was not measured by justice but by power. And they had all the power. The weight of that realization pressed down on me more heavily than the blows of their sticks. My heart ached with a pain far greater than the burning on my back. It was the pain of knowing I was seen as nothing. My humanity had been stripped away. I was not a young girl anymore in their eyes. I was simply a servant, a body to be ordered, accused, and broken whenever they wished. And yet, even as their cruel judgment surrounded me, a part of me refused to believe that I was dirt. I felt small, I felt weak, and I felt afraid, but deep inside, I knew I was more than what they thought of me. I had a voice, I had truth, and though they could not see it, I was not born to be broken. I was born to live, to breathe, to hope. But in that house, surrounded by their anger and cruelty, I had no choice but to endure their twisted belief. They would not see me as innocent. They would not see me as human. To them, I would always be nothing but a maid, someone they could break without guilt, without question, without regret. And so, as I stood trembling, I realized that this was my greatest crime in their eyes. Not that I had stolen, but that I was poor, powerless, and too small for them to care about. By the 5th day, I could no longer speak. My throat burned, raw from days of crying, screaming, and begging for mercy. Every word I had once shouted in defense of my innocence had been stolen from me, carried away with my broken breath. My voice, the only weapon I had to fight against their lies, was gone. When I opened my mouth to speak, nothing came but faint whispers, dry and trembling, too weak for anyone to hear. I sat in the darkness, my back scarred, my body bruised, my spirit weighed down by pain. Silence surrounded me now, but in that silence, my heart still spoke. I could not argue with them anymore. I could not defend myself with words. All I had left were my prayers, whispered into the air, hoping they would rise higher than the walls of the mansion, higher than the cruelty of man, higher than the reach of those who wanted me broken. I prayed to God with what little strength I had left. My lips moved slowly, painfully, as though every syllable carried the weight of a mountain. I asked him questions I had never dared to ask before. Why was truth so heavy to carry? Why was innocence such a dangerous thing in a world that only listened to lies? Why did my honesty feel like a curse while others' deception brought them power? I begged for answers, but none came. The silence of the room pressed down on me, just as heavy as the silence of heaven. Still I prayed, not because I expected a miracle, but because prayer was the only thing left to me. My body belonged to them, beaten and bruised, but my soul, I still hoped my soul belonged to God. Each whisper felt like a thread keeping me alive. My words were weak, but they were real. I told him of my pain, my fear, and my loneliness. I told him that I was innocent, that I had spoken nothing but the truth, and yet the truth had brought me here, locked away, beaten, silenced. My heart ached with confusion. Shouldn't truth set me free? Shouldn't innocence protect me? Instead, it had chained me down, turned me into a victim, left me abandoned in this endless suffering. Tears rolled down my face as I pressed my hands together, trembling in prayer. God, I whispered, if you see me, if you hear me, please tell me, why is truth so hard to bear? Why must I suffer for something I never did? Why do the guilty walk free while the innocent are crushed beneath their feet? The walls gave no reply, and the night offered no comfort. But still I prayed because hope was all I had left. My body was broken, my voice was gone, but my faith clung to a fragile thread that even cruelty could not cut. There comes a point when the body can take no more. After days of torment, my back was raw with wounds, my lips dry and cracked, my eyes swollen from tears that never seemed to end. My strength had left me, drained by the endless blows, the hunger, the darkness. I could barely lift my head, and each breath felt like dragging stones through my chest. I was only a shadow of myself, trembling and broken on the cold floor. It was in that state, bleeding, weak, and stripped of all hope, that the words slipped from my mouth. Words that were not mine. Words I never wanted to say. Yes, I whispered, my voice hoarse and faint. I stole it. The sound barely filled the room, but it was enough. Enough for them to stop. Enough for their cruel satisfaction. Enough to end the storm of pain. But even as the blows stopped, even as the room grew quiet, my heart shattered. The moment the lie left my lips, I felt something inside me break. I had held on for so long, clinging to my truth as if it were my last breath. Yet in that final moment, crushed beneath their cruelty, I surrendered, not because I was guilty, but because I was human. Because pain has a way of silencing even the strongest voices. My innocence, once the only treasure I had, felt stolen from me in that instant. Not by them, but by my own tongue, forced into betrayal by suffering too great to endure. The words did not belong to me, yet they carried my voice. And with them, my truth was buried. I could never take them back. I closed my eyes, tears sliding down my cheeks. I wanted to scream, no, that's not true. I never did it. But the strength to resist was gone. My whisper had already been taken as proof, and their faces showed triumph. They believed they had won, not just over my body, but over my soul. To them, the confession was the final seal. To me, it was the heaviest chain. I felt a hollowness inside me, deeper than hunger, deeper than pain. It was the emptiness of defeat. They had not only beaten me into silence, they had forced me to betray myself. And in that betrayal, I lost the only thing I still owned, my truth. As the men walked away, satisfied with the lie they had dragged from me, I lay broken in the shadows, knowing that though the beatings had stopped, a new wound had opened inside me, one that no healing could ever close. My innocence was gone, shattered not by guilt, but by the unbearable cruelty of a world that punished truth and rewarded lies. The moment the words left my lips, their faces changed. The rage that had burned in their eyes only moments before melted into something even more frightening, satisfaction. Their anger no longer needed fire. It had turned into cruel delight, the kind that feeds on another's suffering. To them, my broken whisper was victory. My tears, my silence, my trembling body, all of it had been worth it in their eyes, because now they had what they wanted. A confession, even if it was carved from lies. The men exchanged looks, their mouths curling into cold smiles. Those smiles were not kind or gentle. They were sharp, triumphant, and filled with poison. It was as though my pain had been entertainment, and now that the show had ended, they were pleased with the result. They believed the torment had forced the truth from me, when in reality, it had forced me into betraying myself. But they did not care. To them, it did not matter whether I had actually stolen anything. What mattered was that I had finally surrendered. The master, standing at the front, allowed a slow, satisfied smirk to spread across his face. His eyes gleamed with a chilling pride, as if he had accomplished something noble. He saw himself not as cruel but as just. He believed the beatings had done their work, that they had peeled away my lies and revealed what he always thought to be true, that I was guilty. The truth, however, was far darker. What they had carved out of me was not honesty, but despair. Inside, I wanted to shout at them, to tell them that what they saw in my confession was not truth but defeat, that their smiles were built on falsehood, on a lie that their violence had forced from my broken body. But my voice was gone, my spirit crushed. I could only watch as they celebrated their triumph over me. My tears still fell, but they ignored them, seeing only what they wanted to see, victory. Their satisfaction was like salt on my wounds. Each smile, each nod of agreement, cut deeper than the strikes of their sticks. They had not only silenced me, they had twisted my suffering into proof of guilt. To them, pain was the knife that carved truth from flesh. They believed it had stripped me bare and revealed the thief they always assumed I was. But deep inside, I knew the truth remained untouched, buried beneath my broken voice. I had not stolen. I had never stolen. Yet that truth no longer mattered. In their eyes, my confession was final, my innocence erased. They had their story, their version of events, and they would carry it proudly, blind to the fact that their cruel satisfaction was built on nothing but lies. And so I lay there, watching their cruel smiles, realizing that sometimes the greatest injustice is not only in the pain inflicted, but in the way others take joy in it. The beatings had stopped, the shouting had quieted, and the cruel smiles of my accusers filled the room. On the outside, the torment seemed to be over. My body lay broken, bleeding, and trembling from the pain. But what hurt most was not the wounds on my skin. It was what I carried inside. Deep within my chest, my heart bled louder than any cut or bruise, for I had spoken words that were not mine. I had confessed to a crime I never committed. The weight of that lie crushed me more heavily than their sticks ever could. For days I had held on, refusing to give in. I endured hunger, fear, and pain because I believed truth was stronger than lies. Yet in the end, my weakness betrayed me. My lips had spoken the words they wanted to hear, and with them, I had destroyed the last piece of myself I thought could never be taken. Every beat of my heart echoed with regret. I could feel the guilt burning me from the inside, hotter than the fire of my wounds. I had not stolen the necklace. I had never even touched it. And yet my voice had said otherwise. Those words now chained me in ways no locked door ever could. They had silenced me not just in body, but in soul. I closed my eyes, and tears rolled down my swollen cheeks. In that moment, I hated myself for giving them what they wanted. I hated the weakness that forced me to surrender, even though I knew no human body could have endured much longer. I reminded myself that I was only a child, beaten and starved, pushed beyond my limits. But still, my heart did not forgive me. My spirit ached with shame. The memory of my whispered confession replayed in my mind again and again. Yes, I stole it. The words felt like poison. They did not belong to me, yet they lived in my voice. I wanted to rip them out, to scream the truth until the walls shattered, but it was too late. They had already accepted the lie as truth. And I was left to carry the burden of knowing that my silence had been broken, not by honesty, but by desperation. Inside me, two voices fought. One said, "You had no choice. You did what you had to do to survive." The other whispered, "You betrayed yourself. You let them win." Between those voices, my heart bled endlessly, a wound invisible to all but me. Though my body trembled with pain, it was my spirit that felt truly broken. I had survived the beatings, but at the cost of my innocence. And in that silence, I realized something cruel. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not the ones others can see, but the ones carved into the soul when truth is lost to lies. Several days passed after my false confession, days that felt like years to me. My body was weak, covered in bruises, and my spirit felt crushed under the weight of shame. I had spoken the words they wanted, even though they were not true. I had admitted to a theft I never committed, and in return, they had given me only silence and coldness. I thought my suffering was over, but the guilt inside me refused to leave. And then, one morning, the truth came out. The missing necklace, the same piece of gold for which I had been beaten, accused, and broken, was discovered. It had never been stolen at all. It was right there in the mistress's own drawer, tucked beneath silks and perfumes, exactly where she had left it. After a night of heavy drinking and careless laughter, she had placed it there herself and forgotten. Her carelessness had lit the fire of my torment. The servants whispered among themselves when the necklace was found. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others turned away in shame. Yet none of them came to me, none of them dared to speak a word in my defense. They had all believed the lies too easily. They had watched me suffer without questioning, as if a maid's pain was worth less than the word of a mistress. For a moment, I thought this discovery would set me free. I thought they would come running to me, apologizing, begging forgiveness for the pain they had caused. But the truth was far colder. When the necklace was revealed, there was no celebration of my innocence. No voice cried out, "She is not guilty." Instead, there was only silence, thick, heavy, and cruel. The family brushed it aside as if it were nothing. The mistress laughed it off, saying she must have been too drunk to remember. And the master simply frowned, unwilling to admit his mistake. No one mentioned my bruises. No one cared about the nights I spent locked in darkness, or the beatings that nearly broke my bones. My suffering was swept under the rug, buried beneath their pride and their wealth. To them, the necklace being found was only a small inconvenience, an embarrassment they wanted to forget. To me, it was the proof that my soul had been shattered for nothing. I sat alone when I heard the news, my hands trembling in my lap. Tears burned my eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear. They were tears of rage and helplessness. I wanted to scream, to shout at the world, "I told you I was innocent." But my voice, once broken, no longer had the strength. I had confessed to a lie, and even though the truth stood before their eyes, I was still branded as guilty in their hearts. That day I learned a bitter lesson. Sometimes truth does not bring freedom. Sometimes it arrives too late, after the damage has already been done. And in that silence, I realized that my pain would always matter less to them than their pride. By the time the necklace was finally found, and the truth quietly revealed, I was no longer the same girl who had entered that mansion months earlier. Something inside me had changed forever. I had walked into that house as a poor, desperate maid, full of innocence and hope, believing that hard work and honesty could protect me. But after everything I endured, the accusations, the beatings, the dark nights of fear, and the forced confession, I was no longer the same. I was broken. My body carried the marks of cruelty, scars that would fade slowly but never fully disappear. My heart carried wounds much deeper, wounds that no medicine could heal. Every smile I had once known was stolen from me. Every ounce of trust one had in people, in fairness, in truth itself, was shattered. The humiliation I felt was worse than the pain of the sticks on my back. It was the humiliation of being called a thief when I had done nothing wrong, the humiliation of having to lie to survive. Yet in that brokenness, I also found a strange kind of strength. I had lived through something most could never imagine, and though it had scarred me, it had also made me harder to destroy. I realized that no matter what they had taken from me, my dignity, my voice, my innocence, there was one thing they could never erase. It was the truth that lived inside me. I had been innocent all along, and I knew it. The necklace's discovery proved it, even if no one cared to admit it. That truth became my silent shield. I carried it within me like a secret flame that no cruelty could put out. And with it came a painful wisdom. Sometimes in this world, it is not the guilty who suffer, but the innocent. Sometimes the innocent are forced to bow their heads, to confess to crimes they never committed, just to survive another day. Sometimes the guilty, powerful, careless, and protected by wealth or lies, sleep peacefully at night while their victims cry into the darkness. This realization made me stronger, though in a way I never wished to be. It was not the strength of joy or freedom, but the strength of survival. The kind of strength born from pain, from knowing how unfair the world can be. I was humiliated, yes, but I was not destroyed. They had broken my body, but they had not crushed my spirit. Instead, they had given me a fire inside, a fire that whispered, "Never forget this, never let them take your truth away again." I was no longer just a maid, no longer just a powerless girl. I had become something more, someone who had seen the worst of people and survived it. And though I walked with scars, I also walked with the knowledge that I had endured what should have destroyed me. In that moment, I understood that life is not fair, but even in unfairness, there is a strange kind of power. The guilty may sleep peacefully, but the innocent, though scarred, carry the strength of truth. And that is a strength no one can steal.